The new Netflix series, When They See Us, highlights the story of the Central Park Five, teenagers falsely accused of raping a Central Park jogger. But the series is also sparking outrage over the tactics police used on these children. Since this case, juvenile incarceration has gone down in the U.S.
The case against the Central Park Five made waves in the law enforcement community and caused many to rethink the way the criminal justice system treats teens and minorities.
Joining us now is attorney Paul Martin. Paul, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
We were just talking about the fact that Emery was in Canada at the time of this incident, but I was here in New York City. You were an attorney in the Bronx during this case.
I was a prosecutor.
Tell us, when the news first broke and you heard what these five boys were being accused of, what did you think?
Well, it was really a situation where I was thinking about the statements that were made. The allegations of the rape were troubling, but even more so that they didn't catch the person that actually committed the actual rape, but these five individuals were with them. And so it really was this acting in concert. So they weren't actually charged with doing the actual act, but because they were with the individuals, they were criminally culpable. And that was problematic for me.
So as you read about the case in the newspaper, maybe talked amongst other prosecutor friends of yours, did you get the sense that these kids were being railroaded?
Not at the time. I was very aware that the criminal justice system is biased towards people of African Americans and people of economic status. So I always had a sense that there was going to be some unfairness going on, but because of their statements and being a prosecutor at the time, I figured that they admitted to being involved in this situation.
Right.
Paul, so as a prosecutor at the time, one of the things that I looked into when I first started in journalism was the number of rapes, brutal rapes, that occurred in the city the same week that Trisha Miley, the Central Park jogger, was raped. And what I found is that there were at least 5 other women across the 5 boroughs of New York City that had been brutally raped in the manner that Trisha Miley was. But none of those stories got any kind of coverage. I found a couple of police blotter notes in the New York Post and the Daily News and the New York Times. All these other women were African American. One woman was thrown off the roof of a building.
I remember.
Right? And she survived, actually, so if people are interested. But she survived, and none of them got the coverage that Trisha got. Describe the environment, the New York City in the mid-1980s.
Very racially charged. We talked earlier, Howard Beach, Yusef Hawkins. Here we have a female white. I think she was a Wall Street broker.
Salomon Brothers.
Right. And the racial animosity between the parties, the economic disparity. So for the media, this became a very sexy story, something that they could spread. And individuals like our current president, who took a full-page ad out that only flamed the racial tension in the city. So yes, I think the media played a part. I think the nature of the allegations, how brutal it was, played a part. And unfortunately, we didn't have the tools, the investigative tools, to exclude them totally at that time.
I want to talk a little bit more about sort of the fallout, right, the echo of this. And you talked about the president, who was just, a real estate guy, a well-known sort of personality in New York at the time. But this crime gave justification for we're tough on crime sort of approach from politicians, from law enforcement. You have this broken windows policy, which was basically, you can correct me if I'm wrong because you were here at the time, which is basically, let's target the small crimes and that will diminish the big crimes. Do you think that sort of contributed to the type of conversation that was happening in New York about this incident?
I think it became a pipeline to incarceration. It ended up having a lot of individuals who normally would not have been incarcerated, not have a criminal record,
right,
to be sent to prison. It became a atmosphere in which jurors were convicting people on less than evidence in order to get back at the defendants, any defendant. So unfortunately, it wasn't a vacation for the criminal justice system. It only became a situation where we were sending more people to prison for less crimes.
And I also read that it sort of signaled an increase in the number of minors being tried as adults, and this concept of the super predator, that even though they're 14 and 15 years old, they're hardened like lifelong criminals.
Well, it played into this racial animosity that all black children, black and brown children were criminals, and it played into the educational system as well. You got to believe they can't be taught, they can't learn, they are wilding, they're doing this and they're doing that. And unfortunately, it had a rippled effect in society in total.
Right. All of it, just to reinforce it, Vlad, all of it based on falsehoods.
Right. That was my follow-up, which is all of it based on falsehood. Now, 30 years later, the boys have been exonerated, and yet there are still people who had positions of authority at the time in New York City, police officers, prosecutors, who maintain that they did everything right. Why do you think that is?
There is this connection between the detectives and the police department and prosecutors, where prosecutors do not really do a real evaluation of the investigative tools or tactics done by detectives in the city. Listen, there's always an interview before the interview. Detectives don't ask the DAs to come down unless they know exactly what these people are going to say. And those interviews aren't taped. Those interviews aren't recorded. So there's things that are said to these individuals. Don't worry about it. I want you to speak to them. Just tell us what you have to say. We're going to let you go. And for someone that trusts the system, these parents, some of these young men had parents with them. They believe that if they trust the system, trust the police officers, because they're innocent, they'll be let go. And unfortunately, the system burns them. They burned them back then, and it burns them today.
So listen, there have been documentaries done on this, right? And this Netflix series is getting a lot of attention right now. But it's not like this story is new to people. We knew about these details already. But there's a very different reaction now to this Netflix version of it. What's happening now, do you think?
But I think we're actually seeing what happened behind the scenes. We're actually seeing how the prosecutors and the police department worked in tandem and ignored signs that could have indicated these individuals were not guilty. And rather than further investigate them, they basically just ignored them. We see how they refused to actually, the detectives came forth and didn't really say how they manipulated these individuals as well. So I think there was a lot of behind the scenes when we get a real taste of what the criminal justice system is like.
So, you know, some of these individuals, they're sort of receiving the fallout now. The prosecutor, you know, people are sort of talking about boycotting her books because she's a well-known writer. Do you think that you know, sort of better late than never, that they should be having to answer to their decisions 30 years ago?
Well, listen, if you made money off of these young men, if your standing in the country was elevated because of the way you prosecuted these individuals, karma will come back to you. And she is basically getting back for some of the things that she has done in the past.
Really, I think the point that you made, Anna Marie, that people have always talked about the Central Park Five. It's been a fascination of mine for many, many years.
And a justification for, you know, for cracking down on minorities, for other abuses within the system.
That came from that case.
Yeah.
I think that people are now starting to understand the way the system works and how it worked back then. And it's just for a new generation. There are young people who don't know about these 5 young men. It's sometimes shocking to believe, but you know, you're living and walking on the streets of New York City, and it's great. You know, New York City has become sort of a Disney fairyland, and there are people that were there who are saying, no, it wasn't always like that, and you should know about these boys because you never know, it could happen again.
But that system, that system is still in place, and so if you do not have proper legal counsel, if you do not have parents to say, no, they're not going to make a statement to you. There's individuals, if you go down to 100 Center Street today, that are being prosecuted for crimes they did not commit, and proper investigations are not going forth.
All right. Paul Martin, thank you so much. Pleasure talking to you.